Alright, so today I want to introduce you to some pattern reducing genes in ball pythons. And when it comes to changing the patterns in ball pythons, there's actually several different approaches you can take. You can actually use genes to increase the busyness of the pattern, such as the leopard or the spot nose or the confusion. Those genes will actually really explode the pattern and really increase the amount of pattern on your ball python. You can also use genes like the champagne. A lot of your champagne combinations will completely eliminate all the pattern. And a lot of times you'll end up with a completely patternless ball python, but there are a few genes that keep the pattern but just reduce the amount of pattern, and some of these genes will actually bring in a certain amount of color as well as reduce the pattern, and some of the genes will just reduce the pattern without changing the color. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you some of these amazing pattern reducing genes in ball pythons. Alright, so I want to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with this snake right here. This is a normal ball python, just a normal, classic, wild type ball python. And this is pretty much the most normal looking normal that I actually found over here on Morphmarket. So I wanted you to see what a normal looks like before we reduce any of the pattern on the ball python. And typically the normals will have this dotted line right down the top. Sometimes the normals can be pretty variable. Sometimes they can have a little bit of striping, but I'd say in most cases it looks pretty much like this. A lot of times you'll actually have these almost like a cartoon character of a Roswell gray alien head on the side of the snake. That's pretty typical of your normal ball pythons. So when it comes to reducing the pattern on ball pythons, I'd say pretty much the number one gene that most people are familiar with is the enchi. And this is what the enchi looks like. And the enchi can be pretty variable by itself too. I've actually seen a lot of enchis like this one right here. This actually has kind of like tiger stripes to the enchi. I'd say maybe about 50%, maybe less than 50% of the enchis will actually have these tiger stripes. Sometimes it's just a really reduced random pattern all through the snake with your enchis. And the enchi is also a co-dominant gene. So you can have two copies of the enchi in one snake. So you can actually take an enchi, breed it to another enchi, and 25% of the time you would end up with a super enchi. And I pulled one up over here. Take a look at this. If you actually have two copies of the enchi, it really reduces the pattern even further. And kind of the interesting thing about the enchis, I'd say most enchis will actually bring out more color along with the pattern reduction, and you'll get kind of this, I'd say kind of a yellowish, almost like an orange color in some of the enchis. And I'd say it's pretty variable from one enchi to the other. I've actually seen some enchis that don't bring a lot of color in with them, and I've seen some enchis, especially the super enchis, that can be really bright, almost like an orangish yellow color, bringing a lot of color into your combinations. So you can actually take the enchi and work it in with brightening genes like the orange dream, the pastel, and the yellow belly. And sometimes if you add enchi, not only does it reduce the pattern, but it'll also brighten and enhance your really flashy combinations. So take a look at this one. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, I'd say, over here. This is actually the genetic banded. And if you actually come over here on morphmarket.com and look up genetic banded, it seems like it's kind of the wild west of pattern reduction. Everyone kind of throws all their kind of random snakes over here. As a matter of fact, this one's actually listed as a genetic banded type dinker, meaning that this is not necessarily genetic. Some genetic bandeds are genetic, meaning if you actually took the genetic banded and you bred it to something else, half the offspring would come out with a reduced pattern. But if you actually come over here and look at snakes like this, this is kind of just a reduced pattern of a dinker type snake, and you don't really know if this is genetic or not. And it can be kind of random as far as what people kind of group over here in the genetic banded category over here on Morphmarket. And I actually pulled up one over here. This kind of surprised me. I actually found a super genetic banded, and over here on Morphmarket there was only one super genetic banded that I found over here on the whole website. And take a look at this. I've never really seen anything that looks as crazy as this. This has a really interesting pattern on this one. This doesn't really look like anything. As a matter of fact, what I'd probably do, I'd take this snake and probably kind of remove it from the super genetic banded, and I'd play around with this. This could possibly be a brand new gene that I've never seen before. And I actually saw that this one's sold for a pretty low amount of dollars. This actually sold for $200, which is kind of crazy. And the super genetic banded is kind of interesting because this is the only one that I found over here. You would think that if it was kind of, you know, pretty much common across the board, you would see more examples of the super genetic banded. So take a look at this. This is actually one of the lesser known genes. This is actually the calabash, also known as the calabash reduction gene. And if you look at the gene over here, it's actually listed as the KRG. And one of the things that's pretty characteristic about the calabash, even though there's not a whole lot of examples over here, what I've actually found in a lot of the patterns on your calabash reduction gene is it has this really interesting random geometric shape pattern all over the place. It's almost like blocky. I've actually seen some really extreme examples, especially if you mix it with fire. You get these really weird geometric shapes that have really interesting patterns along the top of the snake that you really don't see with a lot of other genes. And I'd say most of the times with the calabash, it doesn't really bring in a lot of other color with the pattern reduction. And I actually looked over here for a super, and as far as I've seen over here on Morphmarket, it doesn't look like there's a super calabash reduction gene that's been produced so far. So here is the blade, and let me tell you, when I first started in ball pythons, I was really confused about the blade. I was convinced that the blade was the same thing as the enchi, which it actually isn't. A lot of people kind of get confused over this, and the blade's kind of interesting because it kind of reduces the pattern similar to what you'd see in the enchi, but I'd say in most cases, the blade will give you more tiger stripes in just the single gene blade than you would see in the enchi. I've actually seen, it seems like most of the blades have really strong striping, and it seems like the blade doesn't really bring in a lot of the color, the orangish yellow color that you would see with the enchi. And actually pull this up over here, take a look at this. You can actually have a super blade, and the super blade is a little bit different than the super enchi. It'll reduce the pattern pretty much the same as the super enchi, except most of the pattern will come up to the top of the snake in kind of, I guess you call it like a blade pattern along the top of the snake. And the blade gets a little bit confusing too, because the blade is originally associated with the clown gene, and some people will still list clowns over here, and they'll actually say that this is a blade version of the clown gene, meaning it's just a clown with a reduced pattern, which is not necessarily the same thing as the clown plus the blade gene in a single snake, where you can actually separate the blade from the clown. So it gets a little bit confusing, especially when you're looking at the clowns, the blade clowns, and the blade versus the enchis. All right, so take a look at this. This is a little bit confusing too. This is the Orange Dream, and I'd say most of the Orange Dreams have a really reduced pattern. And the Orange Dream, I'd say, is kind of like an enhanced version of pastel. It can really be super flashy. As a matter of fact, I've seen some really intense Orange Dreams and super Orange Dreams at a really high intensity. I'd say it's kind of similar to pastel, where it brings out a lot of really bright, flashy colors in your snake. But the Orange Dream, I think it tends to bring out a lot more of the orange than the yellow in your pastels. In the Orange Dreams, I've actually seen some people listing Orange Dream enchis over here on Morphmarket, and I've looked at the Orange Dreams versus the Orange Dream enchis, and let me tell you, it takes a pretty keen eye to pick out the difference between the two, because the Orange Dream is reduced in a lot of cases, almost looking like there's enchi in with the Orange Dream, but it's just part of the Orange Dream gene. And another kind of interesting thing about the Orange Dream is if you flip over the snake and look at the belly, a lot of times the Orange Dream will have tracks on either side of the belly, similar to your het pied markers, but a lot of times the Orange Dream tracks will actually come further up the snake, sometimes almost along the whole snake on either side of the belly, almost like someone took a Sharpie marker and drew marks on either side of the belly on the underside of the Orange Dream ball python. It's a pretty interesting effect. So this is the last one I want to show you. So any of these genes you can actually stack on top of each other to get even more pattern reduction. So take a look at this. This is actually the Super Blade enchi. And when I first started in ball pythons, I thought, all right, I thought the blade was another version of enchi. And if it actually was just another line of enchi, technically you couldn't have a Super Blade enchi because they would be allelic, meaning you couldn't have 3 genes of the same type of gene. And I say the most you can actually have is 2. So this has the super blade, 2 copies of the blade gene, and 1 copy of the Enchi. And I actually looked over here, I've been looking for quite a while. I have yet to see a super blade, super Enchi, but if you actually produce something like that, I would imagine it would reduce the pattern even more. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. An American Kid asks, we are new into ball pythons and we have a pied female. Can we breed a clown or a blue-eyed leucistic to our pied female to make some colorful and interesting combinations? And that is a very good question, and welcome to the world of very confusing ball python genetics. There is a lot to learn. There's almost over 200 genes in ball pythons. And the first thing to keep in mind is you have a pied female, and the pied is a recessive mutation. The pied is essentially a snake that has big patches of white through it. So if you actually take the pied and you breed it to anything else, you'll get all het pieds where you can't see one copy of the gene. So if you actually took a pied and you bred it to a normal, you would end up with all normal looking snakes that are all het for pied. And the clown is also recessive. So if you actually took a really awesome clown and you bred it to a really awesome looking pied, you'd end up with all normal looking snakes. So probably what you would want to do is you'd want to take either a het pied or a visual pied to breed it to your pied to get some amazing pied combinations. So if you actually bred pied to pied, you'd get 100% pieds. All the offspring would come out as pieds, which I would probably recommend starting out so you can get some really impressive results right off the bat. And if you actually took the pied and bred it to a het pied with just 1 copy of the gene, you'd actually get 50% visual pieds. But kind of the advantage of that is you can actually get a het pied with a whole bunch of other genes in the mix and probably get more bang for your buck and have some really amazing pied combinations at a lower price point versus buying a pied with a whole bunch of genes in it. And the other thing you also asked about is a blue-eyed leucistic. So the blue-eyed leucistic is an all-white snake with blue eyes, which is, it almost kind of looks like a pseudo-pied. It almost, has the big, it's an all-white snake, and you look at the pied, it has a lot of white in it. But the problem is with the blue-eyed leucistic, it gets even more complicated because there's about 40 different ways to make a blue-eyed leucistic. You can have any 2 genes in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So for example, I can actually take Bobby here around my neck. He is a bamboo ball python. He's in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. If I bred a bamboo to a bamboo, I would get an all-white snake with blue eyes. I could actually take a bamboo and breed it to a lesser or a Mojave or a Russo or a Mystic or a Phantom, any of those genes, and I'd end up with the blue-eyed leucistic. And I've actually seen a lot of people, well, they'll pick up a blue-eyed leucistic from a reptile show and they won't ask what the genes are in the blue-eyed leucistic. So if you actually took a blue-eyed leucistic and you bred it to your pied, your visual pied, you'd get pretty much 50% of one gene in the blue-eyed leucistic and 50% of the other gene. So for example, if you actually had a bamboo lesser, which would be an all-white snake with blue eyes, you get half bamboos and half lessers. You wouldn't get any visual pieds. They would all be 100% het for pieds. So let me tell you, it can be pretty confusing trying to follow all the genetics, especially if you're working with blue-eyed leucistics, which is an allelic complex, or if you're working with recessives like your pied. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.